In this video, I'm going to show you how to place the water pump on this Honda Civic. Let's get started. Underneath the front of the vehicle, you'll see that there's a cutout in the splash shield. Inside this cutout, you'll be able to reach the drain plug and unthread it. Have a collection bucket underneath, of course, to catch the fluid. This coolant will start draining at this point. Don't remove this all the way because it'll start shooting straight out the back, but just let it drain. Once it's done draining, close the petcock. Make sure that's nice and snug. And just take something that'll absorb the drippage, that way it can stop dripping all over the ground once you remove your drain pan. Now that it's done draining, let's cap off the radiator again. That way no debris gets in there and it stays sealed up. With a 10mm socket, disconnect the negative battery terminal by loosening up this mounting nut. Once it's loose enough, pull this off and tuck it away so it can't bounce back and make connection. I disconnected the battery because it is a whole lot easier to do this water pump with the alternator out of the way, so I'm actually going to be removing the alternator. Let's disconnect some electrical connectors here, starting with this one that goes all the way down to the AC compressor. Then we're going to have to get this harness off. Now, there's a little tab here that you can press on and push this connector off of its retainer. Oftentimes they get stuck, so if you can't do that, there's a 10mm bolt that you can remove. That'll get the whole harness disconnected with the retainer. Now this did start sliding, so I'm going to try to continue removing this. There we go. And underneath, you'll see a retainer that has some clips on the back side. This has to be squished in so it can be popped through the mounting hole of the bracket. All right, pull this boot up, press on this tab, and remove this electrical connector going to the alternator. And lastly, take this boot off. This is going to be the main power wire for the alternator. This is a 10mm nut right there. I have to remove that. With this off, you can remove the power wire, pull the harness aside. I like to put this mounting nut back, that way I don't lose it. This harness has a retainer here. If you pry out on this clip, you'll be able to pull this away. All right, now here's the situation. We have to remove the bolt off of that water pump before we take the belt off, otherwise it's going to be very difficult to get the pulley off. To do this, I'm going to put a 19mm wrench on the serpentine belt tensioner, applying extra tension so I can actually break those mounting bolts free without the pulley slipping, and then use a 10mm wrench on the pulley bolts. Break them free. No matter what I do, my pulley keeps slipping because the bolts are stuck and very tight. So I'm going to move on because I have another way of removing these bolts and the pulley, which you will see in a little bit. So let's get the belt off. Now I'm going to take a 19mm socket, put it on the serpentine belt tensioner cutout. Make sure it's fully seated. Slowly apply pressure to it. This is a hydraulic tensioner, so it's going to take a little bit to release tension. And remove the belt off of the nearest pulley, which is going to be the alternator. Release the tensioner and remove your tool. And now you can remove the belt. There will be two 12mm bolts holding the alternator on, one over here, one below the pulley, all the way down there. Let's break those free and remove them. Take this top bolt out. If needed, you can use a pry bar right here to push it out of its bracket. There it is, set it aside. Now I'm going to put a screwdriver through the back of the water pump pulley, and I'm going to poke it right through the front here, where it's going to basically stop the water pump from spinning so I can break these bolts free. If you have a socket that fits there, that's great. If not, you'll have to use a wrench. These are pretty tight. I switched to a 1/4 inch extension because it's a little bit more sturdy. So that's loose, that's loose. We're left with that one right there. All right, let's get this pulley off now. Sometimes these get stuck from corrosion. Just keep wiggling it until it pops off. And I sprayed a little bit of rust penetrant on there. Hopefully that'll help. There we go. Get this pulley off of here. We now have to remove the serpentine belt tensioner, which one of the mounting fasteners is right here. This is a 12 millimeter in size. I'm going to break this free and remove it the rest of the way. There we go. At the bottom of the tensioner, you'll see this 8 millimeter Allen bolt. This has to be removed, and you can reach it from up top. I know you're seeing this from below, but you can reach it from up top. I'm going to put that socket in there, and I'll find anything that fits in here so I can tap it in. I want to make sure that socket is seated. Now break it free and remove that bolt. All right. Oh, there's the bolt. Here's the tensioner. There it is. Now there are a bunch of 10 millimeter bolts going around this water pump. Let's remove it. Also, have a collection bucket underneath because no matter how much you drain the coolant, there will always be some left behind the water pump. I'm going to break all these free, and then I'll remove them, and then of course remove the water pump. Now grab on the water pump, wiggle it, and break it free from the engine. As I said, lots of coolant comes out still, no matter how much you drain it. Now I'm going to take a razor blade and clean up this surface, which for me it looks in very good condition actually. The razor blade will clean up the corrosion without damaging the aluminum. If you have a lot of corrosion, you're going to need to keep scraping until it's all gone. Otherwise you will not get a nice seal from that water pump gasket. You also don't want to use anything that'll gouge it because then it's not going to seal up either. Once that's cleaned up, take a rag and wipe it. Take your new water pump and the gasket, set the gasket on the pump and make sure it stays. Now let's put the pump on. Carefully bring this down, making sure the gasket stays in place. Hold it there and start in any bolt that you can reach. Okay, this one's starting in very smoothly. Now take another one and start another one in, that way it can't pivot around. Get them a little closer. All right, so now the water pump is almost pressed up against the engine block. It can still move a little bit, but now we can start in the other bolts. The torque for these is 8.7 foot-pounds. This converts to 104 inch-pounds. If you're unable to torque these, just do your best to get them nice and tight by hand. Okay, that lower one, I can't get to it with a torque wrench, so I'm just going to make it nice and snug. All right, that's good. Bring the tensioner in. Once you get it around the water pump, have that bolt ready so you can secure it before it falls down. There we go, that's started. All right, it's bottomed out. I'll give it a quick snug. Make sure it can still pivot. Of course, you don't want it to be locked up. The torque on that bolt is 40 foot-pounds. All right, that's it. Line up the tensioner on the other side and thread in the bolt. 12mm socket, snug it up. The torque for this is 17 foot-pounds. I put a little bit of anti-seize on the water pump where the pulley rides. Now I'm going to reattach the pulley onto the water pump. I lined it up so that the water pump has a bolt straight up at 12 o'clock, and that's how I'm going to put the pulley on. And after I put my first bolt, the other ones will automatically line up. There we go. So that's one, and just thread on the other ones as well. Let's use the same trick as before to tighten up this pulley. I'm going to stick my 1/4-inch drive extension. That's going to hold it, and I'm just going to use my ratchet to tighten them up. I can't torque these. The torque for them is 10 foot-pounds, so it's really not that high. I can do this easily by hand. All right, just get them nice and snug. All right. Perfect. These are all tight. Everything spins freely. Now bring the alternator in position, making sure it lines up with its 2 mounting points. I have my bolts ready. I'm going to start in this top one because I can see it easier. This will hold it in place at the top so I can just pivot it to line up the bottom. Don't tighten it fully yet. You do need it to move around. And line up the bottom. This one's going to be a little more difficult just because you can't see it very well. Snug up that lower bolt. All right, I got this snugged up. The torque for this is 17 foot-pounds. It's actually 17 for both top and bottom bolts. I'll start with this one since I'm right down here. All right, that's 17 for that one. Let's reconnect the electrical connectors here. We have the main alternator power wire. I'm going to remove this mounting nut. Once again, inspect this for corrosion. Mine is very clean, so I'm going to drop it right back down on here, put the mounting nut on, bottom it out, and snug it, tighten it up. And you don't need to tighten this a lot. This is a very small fastener, and the stud can actually turn and break inside the alternator. The torque is 6 foot-pounds or 73 inch-pounds. If you're unable to torque it, just give it about 1/8 of a turn by hand after it bottoms out, if even that. So as you saw, it bottomed out, and immediately after that my torque wrench clicked. Reinstall this 4-pin connector on the alternator, make sure it clicks, and put that rubber boot back over it to seal it up. Make sure this wiring harness is clipped into this retainer, and then secure it on this one, and connect it. Make sure that clicks as well. And don't forget to clip this back on. Now let's get the belt back on, put it on all the pulleys, and here's a diagram on the screen of what the belt routing should be like. There are 3 options for this vehicle. You'll see all 3 on the screen, but it will be based on whether you have AC or not, a long belt or a short belt, and if you have electronic power steering, the power steering pump pulley will actually just be an idler pulley. Now with the belt in position and ready to put on the last pulley, which for me is going to be the alternator, I'm going to put my serpentine belt tool there, remove tension off the tensioner, pull the belt up in position, making sure it doesn't fall off any other pulleys, of course. All right, take your tool out. Now you're going to want to inspect your belt, making sure it's centered on all of the pulleys. I see that it is not completely centered on the AC compressor, and that is of course an issue. It is perfect on the harmonic balancer and the power steering pump, so I'm going to put some pressure back on it, try to center this up, because if it's off just one rib, that's not going to go well. It's going to skip and could even cut itself as the vehicle starts running. There we go. Fix that. So at this point, we are ready to continue. Let's reconnect the battery terminal, set this back down, make sure it's seated all the way down. And while holding this, tighten up the mounting nut. That's going to clamp down on this terminal and allow it to stay locked on to the battery post. Okay, that's nice and snug. You know that it's tight when you can't spin this around, and you don't have to go until this nut stops spinning. That would be way too tight. It'll actually stretch this terminal over time, and it's going to cause a bad connection. So at this point, battery's reconnected. Now let's fill up the cooling system, remove the radiator cap. I have this special funnel that I'm going to install here. This will help me bleed the system and, of course, fill it without spilling. It has an adapter that goes on the radiator, and the funnel goes right into it. This will help me bleed the system a lot easier because this will now be the highest point in the cooling system, and the air will naturally want to rise into the funnel and exit, obviously, up top instead of getting trapped in the system. Now I'm going to add the appropriate type of coolant until the funnel is about a quarter of the way full. Okay, it stopped bubbling. I'm going to fill the funnel just a little bit more. And at this point, I'm going to start the engine. Like I said, let it run and warm up. Once you're in the vehicle, start the engine. And we're just going to let it run and idle so that it can warm up. On the HVAC side, I like to put the heat all the way on high, and I recommend this with the blower on low and have it set to vents. That way you can feel when the heat starts blowing through the vents, and you want to make sure that heater core gets full of coolant, of course, and doesn't have air pockets. Because if it does have an air pocket, you're not going to have heat in the car and you're going to have air trapped in the cooling system. So now we're going to just let this warm up, and we'll come back in a few minutes. You want to watch that temperature gauge and make sure it goes up to the halfway point but doesn't go anywhere past it. If it does, most likely there's an air pocket in the system. You're going to have to shut it off, let it cool down, and start again. Once you're done bleeding, if you squeeze on the upper radiator hose just a little bit, plug the funnel, and then remove it, you'll spill a little bit, but not as much as you would if you didn't do that, because there would be coolant right here. Now I'm going to pull this away and put the rest in my overflow container, which is actually almost full, so I can't put too much in it. But for now, I'm going to cap the radiator back off. Put the rest in here. Perfect, right up to the max line, which you can see on the side of it. Make sure you thread that cap back on and clean up anything that's spilt. There you go, take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.